The dog refused to leave the fireplace, and when the old veteran finally looked closer, he realized the abandoned cabin had been waiting for someone all along. A sharp scrape echoed across the stone floor as the German shepherd planted both paws against the wall beside the fireplace, refusing to move. Dust drifted through the morning light, and the cabin fell eerily quiet. The old veteran ran his hand across the rough timber, sensing something that didn't belong, but what was hidden behind those weathered logs had remained untouched for decades. What do you think the dog found? The first thing Jack Turner noticed about Pine Hollow was how quiet it became after the logging trucks passed through. The rumble faded into the surrounding mountains, leaving only the whisper of pine branches rubbing together high above the narrow road. It reminded him of the silence that sometimes settled over an abandoned combat outpost just before sunrise, when every instinct insisted something was about to happen. He adjusted the worn backpack hanging from one shoulder and rested a weathered hand against the thick neck of the German shepherd standing beside him. "Easy, Coda." The dog lifted his ears but never took his eyes off the people walking across the street. 8 years old now, Coda carried more gray around his muzzle than black, and an old scar cut through the fur above his left shoulder where shrapnel had found him years earlier. His retirement had not changed the habits drilled into him overseas. He automatically placed himself between Jack and approaching strangers, scanning faces with quiet patience instead of barking. Jack understood. He did exactly the same thing. The mountain town looked like it had survived several generations simply because nobody had bothered to leave. Weathered storefronts leaned slightly toward the road. Pickup trucks coated in red dust sat outside the diner. A faded American flag stirred lazily outside the county courthouse. Jack had seen towns like this across the West while drifting from temporary jobs after leaving the Army. Fence repair, equipment maintenance, night security, anything that paid enough to keep a roof overhead for another month. Then came the surgeries, then came the hospital bills, then came the notices taped to his apartment door. By the time the landlord changed the locks, all Jack owned fit inside one backpack. For Coda. Coda wasn't something a man owned, he was family. Jack reached into his jacket and touched the small leather pouch tucked safely inside. 3 silver dollars, the coins clicked softly against one another. His grandfather had carried them through the Great Depression before handing them to Jack's father. After his father passed away, they became Jack's. He had promised himself he would never spend them. Now they were all he had left. A loud engine backfired somewhere behind the courthouse. The crack echoed sharply between the buildings. Jack froze, his shoulders tightened. For one impossible heartbeat, the courthouse disappeared. Heat, dust, broken concrete, someone shouting over the radio, taking contact. His breathing shortened. Then something warm nudged his hand. Coda. The dog's nose pressed gently against Jack's fingers. Jack blinked. The courthouse returned. The pickup truck rolled away. A woman pushing a stroller crossed the street without noticing anything unusual. Jack exhaled slowly. "Thanks, partner." Coda wagged his tail once before resuming his quiet watch. The county auction was already gathering in the square. Most of the crowd consisted of ranchers, contractors, and investors carrying folded property maps beneath their arms. Jack stood near the back, invisible. Just another old veteran with worn boots and a dog. The auctioneer climbed onto the flatbed trailer. "We'll begin with parcel 12. Land changed hands quickly. $5,000, $8,000, $22,000. Jack listened without interest. He couldn't afford breakfast tomorrow. The auctioneer shuffled to the final sheet, and lastly, he laughed before reading. Old Trapper's Lodge on Black Elk Ridge. Several people chuckled. 40 acres. No maintained road. Cabin condemned by the county. Structural damage. Water source unknown. Someone called out, "You forgot the ghosts." More laughter. The auctioneer grinned. "That's included." Even Coda tilted his head at the noise. Jack looked toward the map hanging beside the trailer. The property sat high above Pine Hollow. Dense forest. Natural spring marked nearby. Rock bluffs shielding one side from winter wind. Without realizing it, he began studying the terrain the same way he once evaluated unfamiliar operating areas overseas. Observation points, approach routes, escape routes, defensible ground. Old habits refused retirement. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Opening bid, $1. Before anyone else answered, a broad-shouldered man wearing an expensive leather jacket casually raised 2 fingers. 1. The crowd barely looked. Everyone knew Garrett Whitmore. He owned thousands of acres of timber across 3 counties. Jack watched him carefully. Garrett wasn't looking at the cabin location. He was studying the ridge beyond it. Interesting. $1, the auctioneer called. Going once, Jack slipped the leather pouch from his pocket. 3 coins. Cold, heavy. His grandfather's voice seemed almost close enough to hear. Never measure a man by what he owns. Measure him by what he refuses to quit. Jack raised his hand. $2. The square became unexpectedly quiet. Heads turned. Someone laughed. Garrett slowly faced the old veteran standing beside the German shepherd. His smile widened. Well now, the auctioneer blinked. I have $2. Garrett lifted one finger lazily. $2.50. More laughter. Jack looked down briefly at Coda. The dog never looked away from Garrett. Jack opened the pouch. All 3 coins rested in his palm. Every possession he had left in the world. He closed his fingers. $3. Silence settled over the square. Garrett stared at him. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Garrett laughed under his breath. Keep it. He lowered his hand. The auctioneer wasted no time. $3 going once, a pause. Going twice. The wooden gavel cracked against the trailer. Sold. The sound echoed across Pine Hollow. Jack Turner had just spent everything he owned on a condemned trapper's lodge everyone else considered worthless. The county clerk handed him a folded deed 15 minutes later. Congratulations, the older man said quietly. Most folks would have bought dinner. Jack accepted the paper. Dinner lasts one night. The clerk looked at him for a moment before nodding. I suppose it does. As Jack stepped back onto the sidewalk, he noticed Garrett Whitmore standing beside a black pickup across the street. The developer wasn't looking at him. He was looking toward the mountains, toward Black Elk Ridge. His smile had disappeared. For the first time all afternoon, Garrett looked thoughtful. Jack had spent years reading people before they became dangerous. That expression wasn't disappointment, it was calculation. Coda gave a low growl deep in his throat. Jack rested one hand gently on the dog's neck. I know. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of pine down from the distant ridgeline. Somewhere beyond those mountains waited an abandoned lodge that an entire town had mocked. Yet the wealthiest woodsman in Pine Hollow had walked away from it after bidding only $2.50. Jack folded the deed carefully and slipped it inside his jacket. He looked toward the mountains one more time. Then he and Coda began walking. Neither of them noticed the way Garrett Whitmore continued watching until they disappeared around the corner. The road out of Pine Hollow climbed steadily toward the dark timber that covered Black Elk Ridge. The farther Jack Turner walked, the quieter the world became. Storefronts gave way to split-rail fences, then open pasture, and finally long stretches of pine forest, where the only sound was the breeze slipping through the needles overhead. Coda stayed close without needing a command. Every few minutes, the German shepherd paused, lifted his nose, and sampled the air before catching up again. Jack had learned long ago not to ignore that behavior. Dogs noticed what people missed. Near the edge of town, an elderly Cherokee woman sat beneath a cottonwood tree, with several woven baskets displayed on a faded blanket. Most travelers passed without slowing down. Jack offered a polite nod. She looked directly at Coda first. He's still working, she said. Jack smiled faintly. He doesn't know how to retire. Neither do you. The words weren't spoken as a question. She picked up a small polished stone from beside one of the baskets and rolled it thoughtfully between her fingers. People think mountains belong to whoever signs the papers. Her eyes drifted toward the distant ridge. But mountains remember footsteps. Jack waited. They remember greed. A light breeze stirred the gray strands of her hair. They remember honesty, too. She looked back at him. Walk gently. Before Jack could answer, she returned her attention to weaving another basket, as though the conversation had ended long before he arrived. He continued down the road. After several minutes, he glanced back. The woman was still there, watching the mountains, not him. By midday, the pavement disappeared beneath packed dirt scarred by years of logging trucks. The climb became steeper. Jack shifted the backpack higher on his shoulder. His knees complained with every uphill step, old injuries reminding him that nearly 7 decades had passed since he first learned to carry heavy loads. Coda stayed just ahead, occasionally looking back to make sure Jack followed. Around the next bend stood the weathered service garage with faded Forest Service signs still hanging above the doors. A gray-haired man wrestled with a stubborn wagon wheel outside. He straightened when he noticed Jack. "You headed up Black Elk?" Jack nodded. "Bought the old trapper's place." The man chuckled once. "So the rumors are true." He wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag before walking toward a small fenced corral behind the building. A shaggy brown mule lifted its head from a pile of hay. "Name's Molly." The mule blinked sleepily. "She carried supplies through these mountains for almost 20 years. Jack shook his head. "I can't afford livestock. I'm not selling." The man opened the gate. "My name's Earl Dawson." Jack recognized the grip immediately when they shook hands. Firm, confident, working hands. "What did you do?" Jack asked. 32 years fixing Forest Service trucks before they decided computers knew more than mechanics, Jack smiled. "I spent 30 years letting 20-year-olds explain equipment I'd already repaired." Earl laughed. I figured military." "What gave it away?" "You've checked every hilltop since you walked into view." Jack hadn't even realized he was doing it. Old habits. Observation first. Movement second. He scanned tree lines without thinking. Measured distances, noted cover, not because danger waited behind every tree, because once, sometimes it had. Earl untied Molly's lead rope. "Take her." "I can't." "You can." Jack hesitated. "I don't have money. I didn't ask for any." Earl looked toward Black Elk Ridge. "Besides, you'll need help getting supplies up there." Jack remained silent. The old mechanic smiled. "You can pay me back someday." "How?" "Stay alive." Jack accepted the rope. "Thank you." Earl nodded once. "Folks around here stopped climbing that mountain years ago." "Why?" The older man looked away. "I don't trust stories that everybody agrees on." Neither did Jack. The afternoon sun drifted lower as they climbed deeper into the mountains. Civilization faded surprisingly fast. Telephone poles disappeared. Fresh tire tracks ended. The narrow trail twisted between enormous pines, whose branches nearly blocked the sky. The forest felt untouched, almost forgotten. Jack breathed more easily here. Cities demanded attention. Mountains only asked for respect. Late in the afternoon, the distant chopping rhythm of helicopter blades drifted across the valley. Jack stopped walking. Every muscle tightened. The sound echoed off the ridges. Rotor wash, radio chatter. Dust swirling across a dry landing zone. LZ secure. Someone yelling for a medic. The sharp smell of burned diesel. His pulse accelerated. His breathing shortened. His left hand instinctively reached toward a rifle that had not hung from his shoulder in years. Nothing. Only the empty air. Coda immediately turned around. The dog crossed the trail without hesitation and pressed firmly against Jack's leg. One steady nudge, then another. She looked down. Amber eyes met his, not frightened, patient, waiting. Jack slowly inhaled through his nose, held it, released. The helicopter sound faded into the distance. A wildfire patrol, nothing more. The mountains returned. Birdsong, wind, flowing water somewhere below. I'm here. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Coda wagged his tail once before continuing uphill. They walked another hour before reaching an overlook where the forest suddenly opened. Black Elk Ridge stretched across the western horizon beneath layers of gathering clouds. Jack unfolded the property map the county clerk had given him. The trapper's lodge lay somewhere beyond the next two ridgelines, farther than it had looked from town. Molly quietly grazed beside the trail. Coda stood motionless near the edge of the overlook. His ears pointed toward the dense timber below, not barking, listening. Jack followed the dog's gaze. Nothing moved, no people, no wildlife, only endless rows of pine trees disappearing into evening shadows. Still, Coda refused to look away. Jack had trusted that stare once before. Years earlier, it had saved both their lives. He quietly folded the map. Let's keep moving. As the last sunlight slipped behind the mountains, neither Jack nor Coda realized someone else had recently stood on this very overlook, watching the same distant cabin, calculating the same route, waiting for the right moment to return. Jack Turner knew nothing about that. His attention stayed on the narrow trail winding deeper into Black Elk Ridge as daylight slowly drained from the mountains. The forest had changed during the last mile. The towering pines grew closer together, their branches weaving into a ceiling that softened the evening light, until everything beneath them carried a cool blue tint. Even Molly's steady hoofbeats sounded quieter. The old mule seemed to sense the stillness. Coda walked 20 yards ahead, nose low, moving with the deliberate confidence of a dog that had searched villages, mountain passes, and abandoned compounds long before retirement. Every few minutes he stopped, listened, then continued. Jack trusted the pattern. It wasn't nervousness, it was assessment. The trail narrowed again before climbing sharply onto a rocky shelf overlooking the valley below. When Jack stepped onto the ridge, he finally saw it, the trapper's lodge. It sat alone beneath enormous ponderosa pines, weathered almost silver by decades of mountain winters. Part of the roof sagged noticeably toward one side. The porch leaned forward as though exhausted from standing so long. Moss covered much of the stone chimney, while tall grass nearly swallowed the narrow footpath leading to the front door. For several moments, Jack simply stood there. This was what $3 silver had bought. He let out a slow breath. I've seen worse. Coda looked back at him, then trotted downhill toward the cabin without hesitation. Jack smiled. I'll take that as optimism. By the time he reached the clearing, shadows had stretched across the entire hillside. The front door hung crookedly from old iron hinges. One shutter rested on the ground nearby. Wind whispered through broken boards beneath the porch. Nothing moved. Jack didn't step inside. Instead, instinct quietly took over. His eyes swept the clearing. High ground, tree line, natural cover, possible approaches. He circled the cabin once before touching the front door. The soil surrounding the building showed only deer tracks and scattered squirrel prints. No fresh tire marks, no horse tracks, no recent boot prints. He moved behind the cabin. There he stopped. The firewood. Every split log remained stacked beneath a collapsed lean-to. Not scattered, not rotted, stacked with deliberate care, large pieces on one side, kindling separated neatly beneath a layer of cedar bark. Someone had prepared enough wood for months, Jack frowned. People abandoning a place didn't organize firewood. He knelt beside the pile. The upper layers were weathered. The lower logs remained perfectly dry, protected, intentional. He stood again. Interesting. A few yards farther downhill he heard water. Following the sound, He found a narrow spring bubbling from between two granite stones before flowing into a carefully constructed drainage channel. Flat rocks lined both sides. The trench carried water around the cabin foundation before disappearing into thick grass. The channel remained clear. Leaves had somehow never clogged it. Jack crouched beside the spring. Someone had engineered this. Whoever built the place understood mountains and understood maintenance. He cupped his hands. The water tasted cold enough to numb his teeth. Behind him, Coda barked once, not an alarm, a signal. Jack turned immediately. The German shepherd stood near the woodshed, with his nose pressed against an old chopping block. An axe remained buried in the weathered stump. Jack grasped the handle. It slid free smoothly, too smoothly. The steel blade caught the fading sunlight. No rust, none. He rubbed one thumb carefully along the edge. Still sharp. Recently sharpened? No. Preserved. Someone had coated it with grease before wrapping the blade in worn leather. Exactly the way soldiers protected equipment before long-term storage. Jack stared at the tool for several seconds. That didn't belong in an abandoned cabin. Neither did the woodpile. Neither did the spring. The story wasn't making sense. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, cold stone, and old smoke. Dust covered the floor. Spiderwebs stretched across several corners. Yet beneath the dust, everything remained orderly. A sturdy table stood against one wall. One chair, a narrow bed frame, shelves, hooks. Nothing appeared ransacked, nothing overturned. The place looked less abandoned than paused. Jack slowly walked through the single room. Military habits guided every movement, corners first, windows, blind spots, ceiling, the floor. Only after satisfying himself that nothing unexpected waited inside did he finally lower his backpack. Coda ignored the empty bed, ignored the fireplace. Instead, he wandered slowly along one wall, sniffing, stopping, moving another step, then stopping again. His tail stiffened. Jack watched silently. The dog lowered his head until his nose nearly touched one section of rough timber beside the fireplace. He inhaled deeply, whined once, then sat. Jack walked over. "What is it?" The wall looked no different from the others. Old logs, dry chinking. Nothing obvious. He tapped the timber lightly. Solid. He tried another, also solid. Coda refused to move. Jack ran one hand across the rough wood before finally stepping away. Tomorrow. Dog looked unconvinced. Night settled quickly in the mountains. Jack decided against sleeping inside. The damaged roof might survive another season, or collapse before morning. He wasn't interested in finding out. He spread his old army blanket beneath the porch overhang where the cabin wall blocked most of the wind. Molly grazed quietly nearby. Coda lay facing the surrounding forest. Always facing outward, the stars appeared brighter than Jack remembered seeing in years. Without city lights, the entire sky seemed crowded with them. For a while, he simply listened. An owl, flowing water, branches shifting high overhead. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through apartment walls, only mountains. He almost drifted asleep. Then somewhere far below, a dead tree cracked as it fell. The sharp report echoed through the valley. Jack sat upright instantly. His heartbeat surged, eyes searching, breathing controlled. He reached beside the blanket before remembering there was no rifle. Only empty ground. Coda remained perfectly still. The dog wasn't alarmed, just watching. After several long seconds, Jack slowly relaxed. The forest returned to silence. He lay back again, staring upward. The old trapper's lodge had already challenged everything the town believed about it. Abandoned places did not keep sharp tools. Forgotten cabins did not maintain clean water. Ruined homes did not organize firewood for winters that never came. And somewhere inside those weathered walls, Coda seemed absolutely certain something else had been left behind. The first rays of sunlight slipped over Black Elk Ridge, turning the tops of the pines gold, while the valley below remained wrapped in pale blue mist. Jack Turner had already been awake for nearly an hour. He never intended to wake that early anymore. His body simply refused to sleep past dawn. Years of patrols had trained him to expect movement in the gray light before sunrise, when visibility shifted by the minute and shadows played tricks on tired eyes. Coda stretched beside the porch, shook the night's dew from his coat, and quietly began another slow circle around the clearing. Jack watched him while heating water over a small fire. The German Shepherd paused every few yards, nose working steadily before moving on. Satisfied. Then did he return? Clear? Coda sat beside the fire. Jack smiled. I'll take that as a yes. Breakfast consisted of little more than instant oatmeal and spring water. It wasn't much, but unlike the shelter where he'd spent his last weeks in the city, nobody was rushing him out the door. Nobody was asking for paperwork. Nobody was reminding him he no longer belonged. When he finished eating, he studied the cabin with the practiced eye of someone who had repaired temporary structures under far worse conditions. The roof came first. Always keep the weather outside. Everything else could wait. He climbed carefully onto the sagging porch roof before pulling himself higher. Several cedar shakes had completely rotted away. Others simply needed replacing. The supporting ridge beam remained solid, better than expected. Jack nodded to himself. This old place still wants to stand. Using the preserved axe he had discovered the day before, he selected 2 young deadfall cedars nearby. The blade bit cleanly, sharp, balanced, almost unbelievably well maintained. Every strike echoed through the quiet forest. On the 5th swing, crack, his muscles locked. The sound instantly changed. Not wood, rifle fire. His vision blurred. Dust exploded across a narrow Afghan valley. Someone yelled for cover. Another voice screamed over the radio. Taking rounds. Jack's breathing shortened. His hands tightened around the axe handle until his knuckles whitened. Then warm fur pressed firmly against his side. Coda. The dog leaned harder this time, not playful, steady, grounding. Jack closed his eyes. He listened. Wind, birds, running water. No helicopters, no gunfire, only mountains. He slowly loosened his grip. I'm all right. Coda stayed beside him another minute before walking back toward the timber pile, as though nothing unusual had happened. Jack rested both hands on the axe. I still owe you one. In truth, he owed the dog dozens, maybe hundreds. Without Coda, there were days overseas he never would have come home. And now the same quiet loyalty was helping him survive a different battlefield. The work continued. By afternoon, new roof supports were in place. Using cedar shakes split from fallen timber, Jack began patching the largest opening. His movements were slow but precise. Measure twice, cut once. Waste nothing. Military logistics had taught him that supplies rarely arrived when people expected them. Whatever he had today needed to last tomorrow as well. Molly carried smaller logs from the tree line without complaint. Whenever Jack thanked her, the old mule answered by flicking one lazy ear. The rhythm of work slowly settled over the mountains. Swing, measure, lift, secure. For the first time in months, Jack realized several hours had passed without thinking about overdue bills or eviction notices. His mind stayed occupied, present, useful. As afternoon sunlight shifted across the clearing, Coda wandered toward the spring. Instead of drinking immediately, the dog stopped, his ears lifted. He stared toward the dense trees beyond the water. Jack noticed instantly. He lowered the hammer. What is it? Coda remained perfectly still. No growl, no bark, just observation. Jack quietly climbed down from the roof. Instinct returned before thought. He moved toward the cabin wall instead of standing in the open. Old habits, protect the silhouette, observe first, act second. His eyes searched the timber. Nothing. A squirrel darted across a fallen log. Several ravens lifted into the air farther uphill. Branches swayed gently. No movement large enough to explain Coda's attention. Still, the dog continued watching. After nearly a full minute, Coda relaxed and took a drink from the spring. Jack exhaled slowly, probably a deer, or maybe an elk moving deeper in the trees. Even so, he quietly marked the direction in his memory. Observation: never ignore what seems out of place. Late that afternoon, he finally carried his backpack inside the cabin. Dust floated lazily through beams of sunlight spilling across the floor. He opened every shutter that still functioned. Fresh mountain air filled the room. The more he cleaned, the stranger the place became. Inside one cabinet, he discovered rows of glass jars. Most stood empty. Several still contained nails sorted carefully by size. Another shelf held neatly folded canvas sacks. No mildew, no mouse nests. Whoever had lived here had expected someone to use these things again. Near the fireplace, he uncovered a worn broom made from bundled birch branches. He smiled. Guess housekeeping mattered. Coda ignored everything else. Once again, he returned to the same section of wall beside the stone hearth. He sniffed, paused, placed one paw gently against the timber, then looked directly at Jack. Jack walked over. "You really don't want me forgetting this spot." He pressed both hands against the heavy logs. Solid, no movement. He crouched lower. Nothing unusual, yet something felt different, not visible, just unfinished. So I finally stood. Later, the wall wasn't going anywhere. As evening settled over Black Elk Ridge, smoke curled steadily from the repaired chimney. For the first time in years, the cabin looked alive. Warm light flickered behind weathered windows. Outside, the mountains settled into deepening silence. Jack sat on the rebuilt porch step, with a tin cup of coffee brewed from the last grounds he owned, to lay beside him. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The ache in Jack's knees remained. The nightmares would almost certainly return before dawn. The memories hadn't disappeared, but they no longer filled every empty space inside him. There was work waiting tomorrow, a roof to finish, a cabin to restore, a mystery hidden somewhere within these old walls, and for the first time since losing everything, Jack found himself looking forward to morning. The sunrise came wrapped in low clouds that drifted through the pines like slow-moving smoke. Moisture clung to every branch, and the cabin roof glistened where fresh cedar shakes had replaced rotten ones. Jack stood outside with a steaming cup of coffee, studying the ridgeline, not admiring it, reading it. Years in the army had taught him that landscapes spoke long before people did. Broken branches, disturbed ground, shifting birds, every detail belonged somewhere. This morning something felt different. The forest sounded quieter, even Coda noticed. The German shepherd stopped halfway through his usual patrol and stared downhill instead of toward the deeper woods. His ears lifted, body still. Jack followed the dog's line of sight. Nothing, only mist drifting between enormous trunks. Yet he trusted Coda enough not to dismiss it. He quietly set the cup aside. Instead of walking directly into the open clearing, he stayed close to the cabin wall and climbed onto the porch. The higher angle gave him a better view. Still nothing. Then, movement, far below. A horse, one rider, traveling slowly, not hiding, coming directly toward the cabin. Jack watched without moving. The rider wasn't interested in the spring or the trail. He never looked anywhere except the cabin. 15 minutes later, the horse entered the clearing. Garrett Whitmore swung easily from the saddle, brushing dust from his expensive jacket. His boots looked too clean for someone claiming to enjoy mountain roads. He smiled broadly. "Morning." Jack nodded. "Morning." Garrett glanced around. "I'll admit," he chuckled. "You've already improved the place." Jack said nothing. Silence often revealed more than conversation. Garrett removed a folded document from inside his coat. "I've been thinking," I figured. "I'll save us both time." He unfolded the paper. "I'll give you $10,000. Jack didn't answer immediately. I continued. "Cash." He smiled again. "You paid $3 yesterday." Jack looked at the surrounding forest instead of the offer. Interesting. Garrett wasn't studying the repaired roof. He wasn't looking at the spring. He wasn't admiring the craftsmanship. His attention kept drifting toward the rocky ridge above the cabin. Again, exactly as it had during the auction, Jack quietly stored the observation away. "You've barely spent one night here," Garrett said. "That's a pretty good return." Jack finally spoke. "You said this place wasn't worth owning." Garrett laughed. "I've been wrong before." No, Jack looked directly at him. "You don't strike me as someone who changes his mind overnight." The smile remained, but only around Garrett's mouth, not his eyes. Business changes, so does weather. Neither man moved. Coda stepped calmly between them and sat beside Jack. The dog never barked, never growled. He simply watched Garrett without blinking, Garrett noticed. Beautiful shepherd. He earned every gray hair. "I'll make it 15. Jack shook his head. "I'm staying." Garrett sighed dramatically. "I don't think you understand." "I probably don't. This mountain isn't an easy place for an old man." Jack almost smiled. "I've lived in easier places, and they weren't home." For the first time, Garrett's patience slipped, only slightly. "Think about it. I already have." Garrett folded the papers carefully before returning them to his coat. "If you change your mind, I won't." The logging developer climbed back into the saddle. Before leaving, he looked one last time toward the ridge beyond the cabin. Not the cabin itself. The ridge. Then he rode away without another word. Jack watched until horse and rider disappeared behind the trees. Coda remained standing, still staring. Only after several minutes did the dog finally relax. Jack rubbed the shepherd behind one ear. "What aren't you telling me?" The answer didn't come that day. Instead, small things began changing. At first, they were easy to overlook. One boundary stake marking the property line disappeared. Jack assumed weather or wildlife. The next afternoon, another vanished. That evening, he found boot prints near the spring, fresh, not his. The impressions were deep enough to suggest someone carrying weight. He crouched beside them. Size 11, work boots, new tread. The tracks approached the spring, stopped, turned back downhill. No attempt to reach the cabin, just observation. Jack's instincts sharpened immediately. Whoever had come here wasn't lost. They had wanted information. He quietly brushed away the prints with a pine branch. No reason advertising that he'd noticed. That night he changed his routine. Instead of placing his bedroll beneath the porch, he slept just inside the doorway where he could watch both the clearing and the main trail. Sleep came in short pieces, an hour, maybe less. Every unfamiliar sound brought his eyes open before his thoughts caught up. Twice he stepped outside beneath brilliant moonlight. Nothing. Only wind. Near midnight, Coda suddenly lifted his head, not barking, listening. Jack remained perfectly still. The dog stood, walked silently toward the edge of the clearing. Stopped. His posture changed. Forward, focused. Then came the growl. Low, controlled. The kind Jack had heard only when Coda confirmed something with absolute certainty. Jack rose quietly. Instead of walking directly toward the dog, he moved sideways until an old pine trunk provided cover. His eyes searched the darkness, there. A brief flash, moonlight reflecting off something metallic. A belt buckle. Someone stood just inside the timber, watching the cabin. Jack didn't call out, didn't chase. He simply waited. The figure hesitated for another heartbeat before disappearing silently into the forest. Coda exploded forward. His paws thundered across the clearing, branches snapped downhill. Then silence returned. Several minutes later, Coda emerged from the darkness alone, his breathing steady. No blood, no injury, only the scent of unfamiliar earth clinging to his coat. Jack knelt beside him. "You ran him off." Coda leaned lightly against his shoulder. Jack looked into the black forest. Garrett Whitmore had offered $15,000 for land everyone claimed was worthless. Now strangers were climbing the mountain at night just to watch. Jack had spent enough years gathering intelligence to recognize a simple truth. People didn't risk being caught for something without value. He looked toward the rocky ridgeline Garrett couldn't seem to stop studying. The mountain was keeping its secrets, but someone else was trying very hard to uncover them first. Jack Turner decided he would stop guessing. The next morning, he began looking at the cabin the way he once searched abandoned compounds overseas, not for what was obvious, but for what didn't belong. He started before sunrise. The early light revealed details darkness always concealed. Every log, every stone, every joint. He ran his fingers along the walls, listening for changes beneath his knuckles each time he tapped the timber. Solid, 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 nothing. Coda shadowed him without wandering far, occasionally sniffing along the same wall beside the fireplace before moving away again. Jack remembered something his old platoon sergeant had once said. If a place survives longer than expected, somebody built it smarter than you think. This cabin had survived decades of mountain winters. It deserved closer attention. By noon, he turned his focus to the fireplace. The stone hearth dominated one wall, built from thick slabs of local granite fitted together with surprising precision. He knelt to scrape away loose ash that had settled into cracks over countless seasons. Something caught his attention. A faint draft. Cool air brushed the back of his hand. He frowned. That shouldn't happen. The chimney draft moved upward, not sideways. Jack leaned closer. The cool current came from low beside the hearth, where solid stone should have blocked everything behind it. He reached into his tool bag for an old flashlight. The narrow beam disappeared into a hairline gap between two foundation stones, not large enough to see through, just enough for air. Interesting. He resisted the urge to pry immediately. Combat engineers had taught him patience. Hidden spaces were often protected by clever construction rather than locks. Breaking something usually destroyed the very clue you needed. Instead, he carefully examined the surrounding stones. Most carried rough tool marks. One did not. One stone appeared smoother, handled more often. Its edges showed the faint polish left by repeated contact over many years. Jack pressed gently. Nothing, he pulled. Still nothing. He sat back. There has to be a trick. Coda walked over. The shepherd sniffed the same stone once, twice, then suddenly began scratching beneath it, not wildly, purposefully. His paws scraped loose dirt from the narrow space between the hearth and the cabin floor. Small pebbles rolled aside. Jack immediately noticed something, a wooden edge, hidden beneath decades of packed dust. He brushed the dirt away with his fingers. A narrow hardwood strip had been fitted almost perfectly beneath the stone, not structural, a handle. His heartbeat slowed. There it is. He slipped the tip of a small pry bar beneath the hidden grip. Applied gentle pressure. Wood creaked softly, then the entire lower section of the stone wall shifted inward, not collapsed, swung like a concealed door. Jack stared for a long moment. Well, he almost laughed. I never would have found that. Coda sat proudly beside the opening. You would have. Inside rested a narrow compartment protected from moisture by the massive stone hearth. The air smelled faintly of cedar, old leather, and dried herbs. Everything remained astonishingly clean. Jack reached inside slowly. His fingers touched cold metal. He lifted out a weatherproof steel box no larger than a toolbox. Unlike everything else in the cabin, this container showed almost no rust. It had been wrapped in heavy oilcloth before being stored. Someone had intended it to survive. Jack carried the box to the table. His hands hesitated for just a second before releasing the two brass latches. The lid opened quietly. Inside lay several neatly arranged bundles. A leather journal rested on top. Beneath it sat folded maps tied with faded cord. Small paper packets carefully labeled in neat handwriting. Bean.corn, squash, medicinal sage, wildflower mix. He picked up one packet gently. The seeds inside rattled softly. He smiled. Planning for people you'll never meet. Beneath the seeds rested several sharpening stones, fishing line, replacement trap springs, needles, waxed thread. Everything carefully organized. Not treasure, preparation. Then Jack noticed the envelopes. 5 of them, each sealed, each bearing the same simple inscription, for the one who arrives with nothing. He swallowed. No name, no date, just those 7 words. Coda rested quietly beside the chair while Jack unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was steady, strong, almost military. The page began simply. If you are reading this, then you found the cabin the way I hoped someone would. Not through luck, not through wealth, but because life left you nowhere else to go. Jack stopped breathing for a moment. He slowly lowered the page. Whoever had written this wasn't speaking to family, wasn't speaking to a friend. He was speaking directly to him. Jack opened the leather journal instead. The inside cover held a single name, Nathan Cole. Below it another line, Sergeant, U.S. Army, Korea. Jack stared at the words, a veteran, just like him. Outside, afternoon sunlight spilled across the clearing. Wind stirred gently through the pines. Nothing about the mountains had changed, yet somehow everything had. The abandoned trapper's lodge no longer felt abandoned. Every sharpened tool, every neatly stacked log, every protected seed, every carefully maintained drainage ditch, every detail suddenly made perfect sense. Someone hadn't walked away from this place. Someone had prepared it. Prepared it for a stranger. It for a man carrying more scars than possessions. Jack carefully closed the journal and looked toward Coda. The old shepherd watched him with calm, amber eyes. You knew. Coda's tail thumped once against the wooden floor. Jack looked back toward the hidden compartment. If Nathan Cole had expected another broken veteran to someday find this mountain, then perhaps Garrett Whitmore wasn't searching for forgotten timber at all. Perhaps someone else already knew exactly what Nathan had left behind. Jack Turner left the steel box open on the table, but he didn't rush through its contents. Years in the Army had taught him that important information deserved patience. He carried the first letter onto the porch where the afternoon light was strongest. Coda settled beside his boots. The cabin stood silent, except for the soft murmur of the spring. Jack carefully unfolded the yellowed paper again. The handwriting remained steady from beginning to end. If you are reading this, then you found the cabin the way I hoped someone would. Not through luck, not through wealth, but because life left you nowhere else to go. If that is true, then you already understand something most people never will. A house isn't built with lumber. A home is built when someone believes tomorrow is worth preparing for. Jack continued reading. Nathan never spoke about hidden riches. He wrote about long winters, about loneliness, about learning that silence could either become an enemy or a friend. He described returning from Korea unable to sleep indoors, unable to trust crowds, unable to explain why a slammed door made his heart race. Jack stopped reading. His thumb rested against the edge of the paper. The words felt strangely familiar. Different war, different generation, the same invisible weight. He looked towards the mountains. Nathan had written these pages decades before anyone called such wounds by modern names, yet somehow he had described them perfectly. Jack returned to the journal. Unlike the letters, the journal read like daily entries. Some pages recorded weather, others listed repairs around the cabin. Replace roof beam before heavy snow. Clean spring channel every April. Sharpen axe after every 4th cord of cedar. Rotate stored seeds every 3 years. Simple instructions, simple habits. A life built one day at a time. Several pages later, the writing changed. Today I met another veteran. He stayed only one night. Couldn't stop looking over his shoulder. He left before sunrise. I hope he finds peace somewhere. Jack slowly turned another page, another veteran, another short visit, then another. Nathan had quietly welcomed struggling former servicemen who wandered through the mountains over many years. Some stayed a night, some stayed a week. Most disappeared before winter. Jack stared at the page. No one in town had ever mentioned that. The cabin had never truly been abandoned. It had simply become a refuge no one advertised. Coda wandered toward the fireplace again. This time Jack followed immediately. The hidden compartment still contained several rolled maps. He carefully untied the oldest one. Instead of property boundaries, the map showed hand-drawn trails winding across Black Elk Ridge, freshwater springs, medicinal plants, fishing pools, sheltered campsites, winter routes, summer routes. Every trail included small notes written neatly in pencil: unsafe after heavy rain, good place to gather mushrooms, watch for loose shale. A veteran could survive here indefinitely using nothing more than those maps. Jack smiled quietly. Nathan hadn't left money. He had left independence. Near the bottom corner of the map, another sentence caught his attention. Knowledge weighs nothing, carry it anyway. Jack folded the map with surprising care. He understood now why the tools had remained sharp, why the firewood had been stacked, why seeds waited patiently inside sealed packets. Nathan hadn't been preserving a cabin, he had been preserving a chance. Late that afternoon, Jack hitched Molly to a small sled and made the trip down toward Earl Dawson's old service garage. The retired mechanic looked up from repairing an engine. "You made it back, so far." Earl noticed the rolled maps tucked beneath Jack's arm. "You found something." Jack nodded slowly. "Earl, who was Nathan Cole?" The older man's expression softened immediately. He removed his work gloves before answering. "I wondered when you'd ask. You knew him for nearly 30 years. Earl leaned against the workbench. Quiet man. People said he was strange. They usually do when somebody prefers trees over town meetings. Jack smiled. "What happened to him?" "He came home from Korea carrying ghosts." Earl paused. "Back then people told veterans to get over it. They didn't know any better." "No, they didn't." Earl looked toward the mountains. Nathan spent years helping folks nobody else noticed. What kind of folks? Travelers, lost hikers, young families, veterans. He never asked questions. He'd hand them a meal, sharpen their tools, point toward the safest trail, and then they moved on. Jack remained quiet. Earl continued. Most people thought he lived alone. The truth, he made sure nobody else had to. Jack looked down at the journal in his hands. Did he have family? Once. What happened? Earl slowly shook his head. Car accident. Wife, daughter, winter roads. Nobody survived except Nathan. Silence settled between them. After a long moment, Earl spoke again. Something changed after that. He stopped waiting for life to return. He started preparing for someone else's. Jack felt the weight of those words long after the conversation ended. Before leaving, Earl rested one hand on the journal. If Nathan trusted you with whatever he left, he smiled gently. Don't waste it. The climb back to the cabin felt different, not because the trail had changed, because Jack had. He no longer saw an old mountain cabin. He saw years of quiet kindness hidden from the world. That evening, he opened the final page Nathan had completed before his handwriting ended. If you are reading this, then the cabin chose well enough. Don't spend your life trying to own this mountain. Take care of it. Teach someone else someday. That's how good things survive. Jack closed the journal. The fire crackled softly. Coda rested his head across Jack's boot. Outside, the wind moved gently through the towering pines. Far below the cabin, beyond the trees where the trail disappeared into the valley, the faint rumble of an engine drifted upward. Not one vehicle, several. Jack quietly stood and stepped onto the porch. Through breaks in the trees, he caught brief flashes of sunlight reflecting off truck windshields climbing the old logging road. Too many trucks for hikers. Too many for tourists. Someone was bringing equipment onto Black Elk Ridge. And deep inside, Jack already knew exactly who would be leading them. The engines faded before reaching the cabin. That bothered Jack more than if they had continued climbing. He stood on the porch long after sunset, listening to the mountain settle into silence. Coda remained beside him, ears shifting toward every distant sound. Nothing else came, no headlights, no voices, only wind moving through the pines. "They're not here for tonight," Jack said quietly. "They're measuring." The next morning he packed lightly. Nathan's hand-drawn map lay folded inside his jacket, a canteen, some jerky, a small first aid pouch. The sharpened axe stayed behind. Today wasn't about cutting timber, it was about understanding the mountain. Coda trotted ahead as they followed one of Nathan's old trails climbing above the cabin. The route barely looked like a path. Ferns covered much of it. Young saplings had reclaimed sections over the years. Only someone carrying Nathan's map would know it existed. An hour later, the trail reached a granite overlook. Jack knelt. Fresh tire tracks crossed the old logging road below. Large trucks, at least 4. The tread was deep and new. He measured the spacing with his eyes. Heavy equipment, not pickups, not campers. One set of boot prints circled the clearing several times before returning to the vehicles. Survey work. Jack followed the tracks until they disappeared beneath crushed gravel. Nearby, Coda sniffed a broken stake with bright orange ribbon tied around it. Survey markers. Someone had begun laying out boundaries. Jack unfolded Nathan's map. The ribbons weren't marking timber. They formed a rough line across the upper ridge, straight toward an exposed band of dark stone Nathan had circled decades earlier. No explanation, just a simple pencil note. "Leave this ridge untouched." Jack studied the words. Nathan rarely wasted ink. If he'd written that warning, he had a reason. By midday, clouds rolled over the mountains. The air turned noticeably colder. Coda suddenly stopped. His body stiffened, not toward the road, toward the trees uphill. Jack crouched instinctively. Seconds later, voices drifted through the forest. "This way. Boss wants samples." 2 men emerged carrying backpacks and geological hammers. Hard hats hung from their belts. Neither noticed Jack hidden behind the granite outcrop. The older man unfolded a survey map. "The drilling starts next week." The younger one frowned. "What about the old veteran?" Garrett's voice answered from somewhere behind them. "We'll handle him." Jack slowly leaned just enough to see. Garrett Whitmore stepped into view wearing hiking boots and an expensive weatherproof jacket. He looked completely different from the businessman who had visited the cabin. Focused, confident, certain. He pointed toward Nathan's ridge. The preliminary reports were right. The younger employee asked quietly, "You really think it's there?" Garrett smiled. "I know it's there." Jack couldn't hear the next sentence. The wind carried it away. Garrett folded the map. "We buy him out if possible, and if not?" Garrett shrugged. "The county will eventually help us." The 3 men continued deeper along the ridge. Only after their voices disappeared did Jack finally stand. He looked again toward the exposed rock, minerals. That explained everything. The auction, the offers, the nighttime visitors, the survey stakes. Garrett hadn't wanted a forgotten cabin. He wanted the mountain beneath it. Jack quietly memorized every detail before leading Coda back toward the hidden trail. Snowflakes began falling halfway down, early, unexpected. They melted as soon as they touched the ground. For now. An hour later, they reached a narrow ravine crossed by an old fallen pine. Coda stopped before stepping onto the trunk. His ears flicked forward. Jack noticed movement below. A mule deer struggled in a tangle of old steel cable hidden beneath fresh leaves. Its frightened breathing echoed against the rocks. Someone had left an illegal snare. Jack frowned. "Easy." The exhausted animal kicked weakly as he approached. He spoke softly while working at the twisted cable with his pocket knife. "Almost there. One more strand." The wire finally snapped. The The deer stumbled free and disappeared into the timber. Jack watched it go, then picked up the discarded cable. Heavy, industrial, not old, freshly cut. He rolled it into a coil. No reason leaving it behind. Coda barked sharply. Jack turned. Too late. The ground beneath the fallen log gave way. Years of erosion collapsed without warning. Jack dropped hard onto one knee as dirt and loose stones slid into the ravine. He caught the edge with both hands. The sudden movement threw Coda sideways. The German shepherd lunged toward Jack. His front paws found solid ground. His hind legs did not. With a sharp cry, Coda slammed against exposed rock before disappearing into the shallow creek below. Coda, Jack scrambled downhill, ignoring the pain shooting through his knee. The shepherd struggled to stand. One rear leg refused to bear weight. Bright red blood spread slowly through the white foam of the rushing water. Jack's stomach tightened. He knelt beside him immediately. It's okay. His hands moved automatically. Pressure, assessment, breathing, no chest injury, no broken spine. The cut along Coda's shoulder was deep but clean, probably from sharp granite. Jack removed the field dressing from his pack. Years disappeared. His hands remembered every motion. Clean, wrap, tie, check circulation. Throughout it all, Coda never snapped. He simply watched Jack with complete trust. There you go. Jack rested one hand gently against the shepherd's neck. We're getting you home. He fashioned a simple sling using his jacket and a sturdy branch. Slowly, painfully, they climbed back toward the cabin. Every few minutes, Jack stopped so Coda could rest. The old dog never complained. He only kept trying to walk. By the time the cabin came into view, snow covered the clearing in a thin white blanket. Jack guided Coda inside and spread fresh blankets beside the fireplace. The shepherd lowered himself carefully onto them. His breathing finally slowed. Jack sat beside him long after darkness filled the room. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow continued falling. Nathan's journal rested unopened on the table. Garrett Whitmore had made his move. But none of that mattered tonight. Jack gently scratched behind Coda's ears. You carried me through one war. His voice barely rose above the fire. Now it's my turn. Outside, the storm deepened, and Black Elk Ridge disappeared beneath the first heavy snow of the season. By midnight, the wind had become something alive. It howled through the pines, rattled the shutters, and drove snow against the cabin walls in steady waves. The chimney groaned under each powerful gust, but the repairs Jack had made held firm. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Jack sat beside Coda, replacing the damp bandage with one of the clean strips Nathan Cole had stored inside the steel box decades earlier. The old cloth was still perfectly usable. Nathan had packed everything in waxed paper, prepared for moisture, prepared for time, prepared for someone he would never meet. Jack carefully cleaned the wound with boiled spring water. Coda never pulled away. Only once did the shepherd flinch when Jack tightened the fresh wrapping around his shoulder. I know, Jack whispered. That's enough. He rested one hand gently on the dog's neck until his breathing settled again. Outside, another gust slammed into the cabin. Snow sifted through tiny gaps around the windows before melting beside the warm stones of the fireplace. Jack looked toward the roof, still holding. Nathan had built well. The mountain approved of careful work. Near dawn, the wind suddenly changed direction. Instead of striking the front of the cabin, it began sweeping down from the ridge above. Jack frowned. He reached for Nathan's journal. Several pages near the back described winter storms. One sentence had been underlined. Never fear the wind. Fear what the wind moves. Jack read it twice. Then he stood. Coda. The shepherd raised his head immediately. Jack opened the front door only a few inches. Snow had drifted halfway up the porch posts. Visibility stretched no farther than 30 feet. The forest beyond had disappeared behind white curtains. He stepped outside. The wind stole his breath instantly. Something deep in the mountain echoed. Not thunder, a long, rolling groan. Jack froze. He had heard that sound before, not in combat, in Alaska during winter training, snowpack shifting. His eyes climbed toward the steep slope above the cabin. The pines swayed violently. Another low rumble traveled through the mountain, longer this time. His pulse quickened. Avalanche! He hurried back inside. The cabin itself sat protected beneath the broad shelf of granite, but the narrow drainage channel Nathan had built ran directly toward the clearing. If snow blocked it, meltwater later could undermine the entire foundation. Jack grabbed his shovel. No choice. Coda struggled to stand. No. The dog ignored him. Despite the injured shoulder, Coda limped stubbornly toward the door. Jack sighed. I knew you'd say that. Together they stepped into the storm. Snow reached nearly to Jack's knees. The spring remained visible only because warmer water continued flowing beneath a thin layer of ice. The drainage ditch had almost disappeared. Jack immediately began clearing it. One shovel, then another. The work was exhausting. Every scoop filled again almost immediately. Wind erased his progress within minutes. Still he continued. Because Nathan had written it down, because someone decades earlier had known this storm would someday come. Coda stayed beside the spring, occasionally sniffing the snow before pawing away drifts that threatened to block the narrow channel. The old shepherd understood the task without being told. An hour passed. Jack's gloves froze stiff. Ice formed across his beard. His shoulders burned. Finally, the water began flowing freely again. The channel carried slush safely around the cabin, exactly as Nathan intended. Jack leaned on the shovel, breathing heavily. You were right, not speaking to Coda. Speaking to the man who had prepared this place long before either of them arrived. As they turned toward the porch, movement caught Jack's eye. Something dark protruded from a nearby snowbank. He walked closer. One of Garrett's orange survey stakes. Broken, half buried beneath fresh snow, the mountain had erased the survey line overnight. Nature had ignored property claims. Jack almost smiled. The ridge belonged to Winter today. Back inside, he hung soaked clothes near the fire. Coda curled onto the blankets without needing encouragement. Jack opened another of Nathan's letters while the storm continued outside. This one was shorter, much shorter. If the mountain ever forces you to stop, stop. There is no shame in waiting. Pride has buried stronger men than snow ever did. Jack folded the page thoughtfully. He had spent years believing every problem required immediate action. Nathan had survived by recognizing when patience was the better tool. The fire crackled softly. Hours passed. The storm slowly weakened. By late afternoon, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. Jack stepped outside again. The world had changed. Every tree wore heavy white blankets. The clearing sparkled beneath untouched snow. The air smelled impossibly clean. Silence stretched across the mountain. Even the wind seemed exhausted. Jack smiled for the first time in days. It's beautiful. Coda limped onto the porch beside him. The shepherd lifted his nose into the cold air. Then suddenly his ears snapped forward, not toward the forest, toward the valley road. Jack listened. At first he heard nothing. Then a faint cry, almost swallowed by the distance. Human, he turned toward the sound. Again, weak, calling for help, Jack grabbed his coat immediately. Somewhere below the cabin, hidden beneath the fresh snow, someone was stranded. He looked down at Coda. The old shepherd painfully rose to his feet, despite the bandaged shoulder. You don't have to. Coda stepped off the porch anyway. Jack smiled quietly. I didn't think you'd stay behind. The trail had vanished beneath nearly 2 feet of snow. Whatever waited below, they would have to find it before the mountain buried it completely. Jack Turner tightened his coat against the bitter wind and started down the snow-covered trail. Fresh powder erased every familiar landmark. Only Nathan Cole's map and years of reading terrain kept Jack from wandering off course. Coda limped beside him, His injured shoulder slowed him, but it never stopped him. Every few yards, the German shepherd lifted his nose, searching through the sharp scent of snow and pine. The cry came again, faint, desperate. "This way," Jack whispered. Coda immediately turned left, leaving the buried trail and cutting through waist-high drifts beneath the trees. Jack followed. The mountain dropped steeply into a narrow ravine where fallen branches had collected beneath fresh snow. Then he saw it. A pickup truck rested at an angle against two large pines. Its front wheels had slid off the logging road before the storm. Snow buried nearly half the cab. One door hung open. A man waved weakly from inside. Jack hurried forward. "You hurt?" "My leg," the stranger answered through chattering teeth. "I couldn't climb out." Jack recognized him, one of Garrett Whitmore's survey workers, the younger man from the ridge. He looked no older than 30. His face had turned pale from the cold. Jack carefully examined the trapped leg, pinned beneath twisted sheet metal. "Painful, but not crushed. We'll get you out." Using the small shovel he'd carried from the cabin, Jack cleared packed snow around the driver's side. The door opened farther. Together with the man pushing from inside, he bent enough damaged metal to free the trapped leg. The worker cried out as circulation returned. "It's okay," Jack said calmly. "Can you stand?" "Barely." Jack supported most of the man's weight while Coda stayed close, watching the surrounding woods. The injured man glanced at the dog. "He saved me," Jack smiled faintly. "He usually does." The climb back to the cabin took nearly twice as long. Several times the young surveyor stumbled. Each time Jack waited. No complaints. No rushing. Nathan's words echoed quietly in his thoughts. There is no shame in waiting. By sunset, the three of them reached the cabin. Warmth spread slowly through the room as the young man sat beside the fire wrapped in dry blankets. He accepted a bowl of hot stew without pretending he wasn't starving. After several minutes, he finally spoke. "My name's Ryan, Jack." Ryan looked around the cabin. "So, this is the place." Jack said nothing. Ryan lowered his eyes. "I didn't know." "Know what?" He hesitated. "Mr. Whitmore told us nobody lived here." Jack quietly stirred another piece of firewood into the flames. "I do now." Ryan nodded slowly. "I can see that." Silence settled between them. Snow slid from the roof outside with a heavy thump. Ryan flinched, then quietly laughed at himself. "I guess I'm still a little shaken. You'll sleep better after you eat." Ryan stared into the fire. "I probably owe you the truth." Jack looked up. Ryan took a slow breath. "The company isn't after timber," I figured. "We're looking for a rare mineral deposit." Jack remained silent. Ryan continued. "The State Geological Survey found unusual readings years ago. Our company bought neighboring land hoping to secure mining rights, but..." He looked around the cabin again. "This property cuts directly across the only practical access road." Jack finally understood. Not treasure, not gold. Access. Without this mountain crossing, Garrett's operation became far more difficult. Ryan rubbed tired eyes. "Mr. Whitmore thought whoever bought the cabin would sell immediately. He didn't expect you." "No, I don't think he did." Ryan hesitated again. "There's something else." Jack waited. The survey reports mention Nathan Cole. Jack's attention sharpened instantly. "What about him?" "They say he refused several offers before he died. Kept telling people the mountain wasn't for sale." Ryan reached into his jacket. "I shouldn't have this." He removed a folded photocopy. It fell out of Mr. Whitmore's truck. Jack unfolded it carefully. The document was decades old. A letter from a mining company. Offer after offer, each one rejected. Across the bottom, Nathan had handwritten a single sentence. "Some things are worth more untouched." Jack stared at the page for several moments. Nathan had known, long before Garrett Whitmore ever appeared, he had protected the mountain on purpose. The next morning, the storm finally cleared completely. Blue sky stretched above endless fields of untouched snow. Ryan stood outside, preparing to leave using one of Nathan's old walking sticks. His injured leg remained stiff but usable. "I'll tell the sheriff what happened." Jack nodded. "And Garrett?" Ryan looked toward the valley. "He'll know I talked. You don't have to." Ryan smiled sadly. "You climbed into a snowstorm for someone working against you." He looked at Coda. "I should probably find the courage to tell the truth." Jack extended his hand. Ryan shook it firmly. "Thank you." As Ryan slowly disappeared down the trail, Coda remained beside Jack, watching until the young surveyor vanished into the trees. By afternoon, the news had already reached Pine Hollow. The sheriff learned who had rescued the stranded surveyor. Earl Dawson heard. The store owner heard. People who had laughed about the $3 cabin began asking different questions, not about Jack, about Garrett Whitmore. Why had his men been surveying during an early blizzard? Why had they entered private property without permission? Why had Garrett offered so much money for a worthless mountain? Questions spread through the valley faster than the melting snow. And for the first time since arriving in Pine Hollow, Jack realized he was no longer standing alone. 3 days later, the snow began to melt. Thin streams of water trickled beneath the drifts, feeding the spring that Nathan Cole had protected so carefully for decades. The mountain seemed to breathe again. Jack spent the morning repairing the porch railing while Coda rested nearby, his injured shoulder healing a little more each day. The German shepherd still carried himself carefully, favoring one leg, but the sharpness had returned to his eyes. Every now and then, he stood, walked the perimeter of the clearing, then returned to lie in the warm sunlight. The routine comforted Jack. Healing rarely happened all at once. It arrived one careful step at a time. Just before noon, the sound of an approaching engine echoed up the trail. This time there was no urgency, no secrecy. A county sheriff's truck stopped near the cabin. Sheriff Daniel Brooks climbed out carrying a weathered folder beneath one arm. Behind him came Earl Dawson. Jack walked down to meet them. The sheriff removed his hat. "Mr. Turner." "Sheriff, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "Ryan Mitchell told us everything." Jack nodded. "I figured he might." Brooks looked around the property before speaking again. "We've suspended Mr. Whitmore's survey permits until we determine whether his crews crossed onto private land without authorization." Earl smiled quietly. "Told you folks around here eventually noticed the truth." Jack returned the smile. The sheriff handed him the folder. "This also belongs to you." Jack frowned. "I've never seen it, no. But Nathan Cole wanted whoever inherited the cabin to have it." Jack slowly opened the folder. Inside rested a copy of Nathan's original will. Attached behind it was a letter from an attorney dated more than 30 years earlier. Sheriff Brooks folded his arms. "The county archives uncovered it yesterday." Jack scanned the first page, then stopped. He read it again. The language was unmistakably deliberate. Nathan Cole directed that if no surviving family members remained, the property would never be auctioned through ordinary sale unless every attempt had first been made to transfer it to a financially distressed military veteran. If no such person accepted the inheritance, only then could the land be sold publicly. Jack looked up slowly. "The auction." Brooks nodded. "The county finally exhausted every legal notice. 18 veterans declined over the years. Some had already passed away. Others couldn't reach the mountain." Earl added softly. "By the time your name came up, most folks had forgotten why the property was handled differently." Jack looked back at the document. Nathan hadn't stumbled into leaving him the cabin. He had planned it. Decades before Jack even knew the mountain existed. Brooks continued. "The $3 opening bid?" Jack nodded. "Required by the will." Nathan had written one final instruction. "Never price hope beyond the reach of someone who needs it." For several moments, no one spoke. Wind stirred gently through the pines. Coda rested his head against Jack's leg. The old dog seemed to understand that something important had just found its rightful place. After the sheriff and Earl left, Jack returned inside. He unlocked the steel box once more. Only one sealed envelope remained, the final letter. His hands lingered on the seal before opening it. The handwriting appeared slightly weaker than in the earlier letters. Age had finally reached Nathan's hand. Friend, if you have opened this letter, then I have likely been gone many years. That is all right. Mountains measure time differently than people. I once believed losing my wife and daughter ended my purpose. For a long while I simply existed. Then one winter, a young veteran knocked on my door. He was hungry. He was ashamed. He thanked me for a bowl of soup as though I had given him the world. The next morning he smiled before leaving. It was the first smile I had seen in months. That day I understood something. Pain grows smaller when it helps carry someone else's. So I stayed. I repaired the roof every spring, stacked firewood every autumn, saved seeds every harvest, not because I expected to use them, because someday someone else would. Jack paused to wipe his eyes before continuing. If you found this place, then you have survived things no stranger needs explained. I hope this mountain reminds you that surviving is not the same as living. When the time comes, leave the cabin better than you found it, then leave someone else the chance to begin again. That is the only inheritance worth protecting. Nathan Cole. Jack folded the letter with extraordinary care. He looked around the cabin, the repaired roof, the clean shelves, the sharpened tools, the neatly stacked firewood. Nothing here had been prepared to preserve the building. Everything had been prepared to preserve dignity. As evening settled over Black Elk Ridge, Jack stepped onto the porch. The valley below glowed beneath the setting sun. Far away, Pine Hollow looked small, peaceful. Coda joined him, leaning lightly against his leg. Jack scratched the old shepherd behind one ear. You know, he said quietly, I thought I inherited a cabin. Coda looked up. Jack smiled. I think we inherited a promise. High above them, the first returning geese crossed the evening sky. Winter was ending. Another season was beginning. And somewhere beyond the distant ridges, another veteran was still searching for a place to belong. Spring arrived slowly on Black Elk Ridge. Snow retreated into the shadows beneath the pines. Wildflowers pushed through damp earth where drifts had stood only weeks before. The spring beside the cabin ran stronger than ever, its clear water singing over smooth stones exactly as Nathan Cole had described in his journal. Jack Turner stood on the porch with a fresh coat of paint drying behind him. The cabin no longer leaned, the roof no longer leaked, the windows reflected morning sunlight instead of years of neglect. It was still simple, still quiet, still exactly what Nathan had intended. Coda lay at the top of the porch steps. The scar across his shoulder had healed into a thin silver line beneath his fur. He still favored the leg slightly on long walks, but anyone watching him patrol the clearing would never mistake him for an old dog ready to quit. Some habits never retired. Jack smiled. Neither did old soldiers. The months that followed changed Pine Hollow in ways no one had expected. Garrett Whitmore's company quietly withdrew its mining proposal after county officials rejected several permit applications and launched an investigation into unauthorized survey work on private property. The newspapers called it a business decision. The people in town called it something else. They called it the day the mountain finally answered for itself. Ryan Mitchell returned one afternoon carrying a box of young pine seedlings. I figured we owed the ridge something. Jack accepted the box. I think Nathan would have approved. Together they spent the afternoon planting new trees where old logging scars had slowly begun to heal. No speeches, no photographs, just honest work. Earl Dawson arrived a week later with lumber left over from an old barn restoration. You'll need another bunk. Jack looked up. For visitors? Earl nodded. You know they're coming. He was right. The first visitor arrived in early summer. A gray-haired Marine named Frank pulled into the clearing driving a truck older than both of them. He carried one duffel bag, one fishing rod, and eyes that rarely stopped searching the tree line. Jack recognized them immediately. Frank stayed 3 nights. During that time, no one asked about medals. No one asked about nightmares. They repaired a fence, caught trout from Nathan's favorite stream, shared coffee before sunrise. On the 4th morning, Frank smiled as he packed the truck. It wasn't a large smile, just enough. Jack remembered Nathan's letter. That day I understood something. Pain grows smaller when it helps carry someone else's. By autumn, another veteran came, then another. Sometimes they stayed only 1 night, sometimes a week. One woman from the Air Force spent an entire month restoring the old garden behind the cabin before returning home to reconcile with her family. A former Navy corpsman repaired the woodshed roof without being asked. A retired Army mechanic rebuilt Molly's harness using scraps of leather found in Earl's workshop. Each person left something behind, not money, not possessions, something quieter. A repaired step, fresh blankets, firewood stacked beneath the lean-to. A handwritten recipe tucked inside a kitchen drawer. The cabin slowly became exactly what Nathan had dreamed. Not a museum, not a monument, a living place. One crisp October afternoon, Jack finally opened a fresh notebook. On the first page he wrote, "For whoever arrives next." He paused, then continued, "If life brought you here, you don't need to explain why. The coffee is in the blue tin. The spring never freezes. Coda likes his ears scratched before breakfast. The roof has already survived 1 hard winter, so have you. Take your time." Jack smiled as he closed the notebook. He placed it inside the steel box beside Nathan's journal, not replacing it, continuing it. Years passed. Jack's hair turned completely white, his hands grew slower, the cabin grew stronger. Young pines became tall enough to cast afternoon shade across the clearing. Children from Pine Hollow occasionally visited with their grandparents to help plant flowers or repair fences. Most of them never learned the full story. They simply knew there was an old veteran on the mountain who never turned away someone needing a quiet place to breathe. One cool evening, Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the ridges in gold and amber. Coda rested beside him, his muzzle now almost completely white. Neither of them needed many words anymore. The silence between old friends had become comfortable. Below them, another truck slowly climbed the winding mountain road. It stopped near the trailhead. A man stepped out, mid-60s, backpack, careful movements. He stood for several moments, staring toward the cabin, uncertain whether to continue. Jack quietly rose from his chair. Coda stood beside him. The old shepherd's tail gave one slow wag. Jack walked down the path until the newcomer noticed him. Neither man spoke immediately. They simply nodded, one veteran recognizing another. Jack smiled first. "Long drive?" The man returned a tired smile. "Long few years." Jack looked toward the cabin. "There's fresh coffee and plenty of room." The man's shoulders relaxed for the first time since stepping from the truck. Together they began walking toward the porch. Behind them, the evening wind whispered through the towering pines. Ahead of them, warm light spilled gently from the cabin windows. High above Black Elk Ridge, migrating geese crossed the autumn sky just as they had the day Nathan first dreamed of leaving hope to someone he would never meet. The cabin remained exactly where it had always stood, not guarding a fortune, not hiding a secret. Simply waiting. Waiting for the next tired soul to find the trail. Waiting for another chance to remind someone that even after losing everything, a life could still begin again. If this story touched your heart, leave a simple 1 in the comments. It may only be one number, but it tells us this journey meant something to you. And if you've ever believed that kindness, loyalty, and second chances still matter, we'd love to hear where you're watching from. Your comments help build a community that inspires the next story. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because another unforgettable journey is waiting just around the corner. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and we'll see you in the next story.